it's a pleasure to be here. And when I first heard about that, there's a TEDx going to happen here at Gunn High School, and and I was reflecting back that the last time I was actually spoke at a high school was when I was in high school myself. So it's been a while. But what I wanted to talk today about was entrepreneurship a little bit, because this is something which is near and dear to me, and something which I believe, just like every other profession, whether you become a doctor or a lawyer or a consultant or something else, entrepreneurship is also a profession where you practice the art and science of entrepreneurship, and you get better as you play the game, as you learn how you serendipitously discover things. And I want to talk about this notion of serendipity because it's a powerful one. And if I reflect back at my last 20 years of kind of this entrepreneurial serendipitous journey, I think serendipity has a big role to play. And how do you craft your kind of entrepreneurial journey with serendipity is something which I feel is something which one can look into. So I just did some Google searches and said, okay, so what does serendipity mean? So I'd never really looked at it in that detail, but apparently that there's a story behind it, and I'll tell you the story. So there was a royal poet in New Delhi back in 1300s. His name was Amir Khusro, and he was a very scholarly man, and he was and he used to write these scholarly poems and so forth. So the word serendip comes because it talks about these three princes who were part of a fable or a story at the time, and then it was taken over by the Europeans and then later translated in other language. So the word serendipitous comes basically about making discoveries by accidents, and hopefully desirable ones, discoveries which you want to actually make, and things which you discover in a positive light. So basically what happened was, so this story goes like this. So there was this king, and he had three sons who were the princes, and so he wanted them to really do well in life and basically take over the kingdom later in that part of the world, in this province of Sri Lanka called Serendip, and that was the origin of this place. So he said, okay, so he hired the best tutors he could, and he gave his three sons the best education he could. Then after the education was over, he met with them, and he was kind of disappointed because he felt his three sons were not really ready to take on the throne of the kingdom, but they were very academic. They had a world experience which was just reflected of what they had learned from the tutor, but really not seen the world. So he went on to challenge his sons and said, guys, go ahead, here's the problem I'm going to give you. Go in the real world and try to solve it. I want you guys to go find a camel. And that was the problem which was given to them. These three sons had never seen a camel before. They didn't know what a camel was. And so this whole journey of theirs, which went on for a long period of time, was to find a camel. So they went into this foreign country where they had to find a camel. And it was very interesting because the story keeps going on. So for example, one of them saw on one side of the road, the grass was a little bit eaten. So they interpreted that the camel is probably blind on one side because he can see the grass on one side, but he's not able to see the grass on the other side. Then while they were traveling in this foreign land, they again saw that the grass had fallen off on the left side of the road. They thought that probably one of his left tooth was broken because the grass fell off. So the story goes on and on and on as they were trying to figure out this animal which they had never seen. And at the end of this whole story, there was a traveler passing by, and he just comes to these guys, these three princes, and says, by the way, I just saw a missing camel in the desert. And then the light bulbs goes on in their head, and they say, aha, we just found the camel. And that was the discovery of the camel. So it was this journey which they took, in this case, enforced by their dad, who basically said, I want you to go to this foreign land. I want you to explore an animal that you've never seen, and I want you to get into this serendipitous journey, and then fearlessly going ahead and trying to define a camel, which was a big, big problem back in 1300. Because if you had never seen one, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have the browser, and you couldn't ever picture what this animal would look like. Well, most of innovation and discovery is somewhat like that. So, we are now, what, 700, 800 years post in the future, but the reality of the world is there are still camels out there which we try to discover every day of our lives, whether it's to solve social problems, or whether it's to solve economic problems, or technology problems, or whatever else. So I look at it, how do you develop an aptitude for desirable discoveries by accident? Some people call it good fortune and luck. And you could argue that those three princes were really lucky. If the traveler hadn't come by and given them the cue about the camel, they would have never discovered it. But there's a lot more which happened behind the scene I want to just raise attention to, is this notion of accidental discovery. So how does accidental discovery happen? And as I reflect back at my own experiences and what I've seen around, I feel there are four kind of core components of this notion of accidental discovery: imagination and exploration, hunger and perseverance. And these are things which are, all of us have some notion of what these things mean, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about it. Imagination, in this particular case, they were really imagining the camel. And if you read the fairy tale, which I would highly encourage you guys to read, because it was hilarious, absolutely hilarious, to see how a camel can be defined if you haven't seen one. Because they didn't know if it had 3 legs or 4 legs, or whether it would, be a small animal like a goat, or was it like an elephant. They had no dimension to this camel. So there was a lot of imagination going on. The three of them brainstorming with each other, endlessly to figure out what this camel would be, looking at every cue along the way. I also look at the way they thought through the problem of the discovery of the camel. Another example which comes from a little bit more modern time is Charles Babbage. I don't know if you guys have heard his name. He invented the first computer, back in 1800s. So Charles Babbage, just as a little bit of an introduction, was, he wanted to see how he could actually add numbers or multiply two numbers using a machine. And if you guys haven't gone to the Computer History Museum here in Mountain View, I would totally urge you guys to go there and take a look at it. We do have one of the replicas of that machine here in Mountain View. What's fascinating is that he looked at and imagined that you could apply a machine to add two numbers or to multiply two numbers. And he had figured out in a very detailed way through levers and pulleys and all of this stuff how a carry forward of 1 happens and how the numbers adds. So he was imagining this world where you could add two numbers without having to use your brain. And that was the origination of computing as we know. Exploration is again a very critical item, which I feel, if they hadn't gone to that foreign land, they would not have learned what this camel was. And this is again one of those things, for some people this exploration happens because their dad tells them to explore, or their mom does, or they do it on by themselves, or somebody else, their friend or somebody else. But whatever be the reason, that apart, an exploration is a critical component of what motivates people to actually discover. So you have to be fearless in exploration, and that's something which I felt that as an inventor, as a discoverer, you have to have that appetite for exploration, where you don't get bound by in-the-box thinking, but you're open to looking at the world outside the box, open your aperture in a broader sense. Hunger is the third concept, which I feel, it boils down to how deep within do you feel the thirst and the hunger to make a difference, to make an impact, and make things happen. And it's the internal curiosity which an entrepreneur carries, to say, I'm going to make an impact, change the world, or do something different. That is something, again, is very personal. For some people, it comes because they want to impact the world. For some, it comes because they just want to test their own human potential of what they can achieve or not achieve. And then perseverance. Again, this is a critical item, because if they hadn't waited long enough perhaps, and if, they wouldn't have found the camel because it took them a long, long time before that tourist traveler came and handed over the camel to them. So sometimes the discovery doesn't happen right in the first go. You make a lot of mistakes, and you learn from them, and you keep going. So I just wanted to take a little bit of the history of, kind of the last 20 years, but also share some of my own experiences on this whole journey of serendipity and discovery. So, 1993, and I just wanted to get back to that point in time, and some of you were, I would assume were already born or about to be born or in that phase, but that was also the genesis of the internet browser. And I can tell you, at that time, I was a student, and I was trying to find the camel. I just did not know that what would the browser look like. I had no idea. It seems so simple right now, but at that time, we were thinking about a vending machine. So think of this idea, a vending machine where you could, just like the way you get a Coca-Cola, you could get out software. Okay, so the idea was to have these vending machines all over the place, and that was a project which, really knowledgeable people from HP and Smart Valley and CommerceNet, and these were people who were very intelligent apparently, were thinking about all these ways of the thing, and then lo and behold, from somewhere from the left field, comes the browser, and then there was the aha moment, and all of us at the time said, this is it, this is the camel, right? So when you see it, you know it, you got it, right? But before that period, there was a lot of exploration. We were talking about how communications might change because there was talk about information superhighway and all of the stuff, but nobody knew this camel at that time. And it went on for a number of years. But I was fortunate enough to be part of that discovery process, and I didn't, because of my hunger or whatever you call it, I didn't take the structured path. I didn't pursue a job or a regular thing. I ventured out. I didn't have my dad tell me to go out into this foreign land. I came out because I wanted to do it myself. So so this was my decision, my own. But my dad was an inspiration in this case, and my mom was too. But it was the fact that I didn't want to take a structured path also played a big role, because if I had gotten plugged into a job scene at that point of time, perhaps it would have limited the amount of exploration I could have done. So I just want you guys to think about it. For many of you who want to pursue an entrepreneurial career, you do need time to explore, and it's a good thing to do, and you need to follow your heart in that moment. And then finally, this is a marathon and not a sprint. So don't look for results, right away. There's going to be a lot of disappointments before you're going to hit the bullseye, before you're going to hit the, find the camel, if you will. And I just did a Google search. There was this article which I found from Slack, and this actually cites my own accidental discovery. So I was trying to figure all this out. So I was kind of bored after a while because I didn't have a real job because I was just bumping around, right? So because I refused to take a real job, so I said maybe I should volunteer for American Red Cross, and that is. So Greg was one of the guys who was at Slack at the time, so he and I said, okay, let's figure out. And so we weren't good at many things, so we said, let's try to do something which we can. So we said, okay, we're going to build the homepage for American Red Cross in 1993, 94 timeframe. So again, it was very, very serendipitous. We weren't trying to, we didn't have a grand plan. We didn't want to change the world. We didn't want to, do something fancy. We were just downright bored. And that was the bottom line. So we said, let's go spend time at the American Red Cross Palo Alto chapter right here. And I built the first homepage for the American Red Cross Palo Alto chapter. And then what happened was it got noticed by the national headquarters in Washington, D.C., and then I got an invitation. And everything added up after that because they wanted to see it. They gave me a $10,000 project, and and then one thing led to another. But the fact that I was comfortable to explore, where a lot of people at the time I knew were taking jobs with McKinsey or with other good companies or here and there. I was in my little apartment, and I was coming from a very humble background. Prior to that, I was comfortable living on in a modest way, but comfortable in being anonymous. and exploring on my own journey. So I just want you guys to think about that. There's power to that, and if you do it well, it can be really take you down a path of entrepreneurship, which can be very, very rewarding and can be very, very powerful journey. So we did this community for Palo Alto, and then we slowly built it for the whole national American Red Cross around the world. And then one thing led to another, and then WhoWhere, my first company, got born out of it, because I got the notion that how do you build communities? And I'd seen Yahoo, Excite, InfoSeek, all of those search engines. These were the search engines before Google was born. They were the ones which were prevalent at the time. So the whole aha moment had come, because now I could say, you know what, you need to connect people together. That's the most important thing. Forget information, it's people. Because we were trying to connect the volunteers with American Red Cross Palo Alto chapter. So that was the genesis of the idea. And then, by 1996, we raised our first $4 million. So this was a 3-year journey, to find the camel in my own way. I still remember, carrying that $4 million check which we got from the VCs, and it was such a high because I couldn't believe it. I mean, that was the kind of money I'd never ever seen in my life. I never dreamt of it. And that was not necessarily my intent or desire either, because it started with a very serendipitous journey with the American Red Cross, but one thing led to another. But what I allowed myself to do is to spend those 3 years not worried about job or income or anything else, but to be in a fruitful, accidental discovery mode. And I would urge you guys to reflect on it, because for some people, it's a very valid approach to take once you think outside, after college or after school and so forth. So fast forward to 2011, where we're sitting now. I honestly believe that the opportunities for accidental discoveries have actually been amplified tremendously now. I genuinely believe that in the era in which you guys are, you are absolutely fortunate and gifted, because the networks is facilitating more discoveries. You can connect with more people. I mean, this notion of sharing of ideas, TED didn't exist that time. There was no way to even hear the TEDTalks or any of this stuff. So you can now touch different ideas in ways that you couldn't have done before. You still need hunger and perseverance, and I think that is something which I would like us to just reflect upon as something which is very personal. But if you have that, then the accidental discoveries will happen. And I honestly believe that if you give yourself 3 to 4 years time, because it takes time, these things don't happen in one quarter or 6 months or 1 year, but some people get lucky, but I don't call that a strategy. But if you spend 2-3 years doing something nice, you will end up finding yourself at the right place. And then the other thing which I would highlight is do something local. The Palo Alto chapter thing, which I did with American Red Cross, was an amazing, amazing thing for me to have done in hindsight. If I look back at my own, 20 years back, that was a great thing for me to do. I really would urge you guys to think about, do something local, figure out something in Palo Alto, and just start your journey in a simple way, and see if that leads to something interesting, that you do find the camel. Okay, so we're back to year 1300. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. And thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.